So over the past couple of days, I've looked back at Blake Griffin and Amare Stoudemire's career. And when you look at their careers, it's actually insane the way these two careers mirror each other. So let me set it up for you really quickly. Both of these guys came into the NBA and were rookie of the years. Both guys were very physically imposing and athletic archetypes, right? 6'10, built, broad shoulders, could jump out the gym, were very explosive. Both guys had both of those things. Through the course of their career, both guys were five-time All NBA selections, and both guys were six-time All Stars, right? So we lay it out there foundationally when you're talking about awards, when you're talking about accolades. These guys essentially had the same career. Now, also what's similar, as these guys aged, as these guys got deeper into the careers, their injuries begin to stack upon each other, and they both probably didn't have the longevity or the primes that we would hope for because of some of those injuries. Now, with that being said, when you start to look at these careers, how dominant they were in their primes, even though their primes were relatively short, how much success that they had, both of these guys contributed to winning at a high level. I think both guys played in conference finals. Amare Stoudemire played in the finals, I believe. Actually, no, he played in the conference finals twice, I think. But both of these guys contributed to winning at a high level. Both of these guys were very productive. If you look at their stats practically mirror each other, right? 19 points, 8 boards. Blake Griffin, the better shot creator and playmaker, but Amare Stoudemire, the slightly more efficient one, at least when you're looking at just box score stats. Amare Stoudemire played longer, even though towards the end of his career he had came back. He had played for teams like the Knicks, Miami, and stuff. To kind of extend his career for a brief amount of time. So you see it right on paper, statistically, awards, accolades, everything is dang near exactly identical. So where are the differentiators, right? Where do these two separate from each other? When I look at their playing style, when I look at their careers, when I look at their individual games, there are definitely differences, right? Like even though they're both insane athletes who could, jump out the gym, play at a high level, attack the rim, had decent mid-range games, they had subtleties. So what are those subtle differences? So for me, the differences are Amare Stoudemire throughout his career is probably the better isolation scorer, right? I think he could catch that thing on the elbow, in the mid post, back to the basket, and do some serious damage, right? That first step was insane. That mid range jumper was elite, and that created a lot of opportunity for him. I remember when he first signed with the Knicks out of free agency before Melo got there. I think he had like the longest streak of 30-point games scored because he was just on a tear for that moment when he was still healthy and he was still playing at a high level, right? So I'd say the differences for me are that Amare's the better isolation scorer. Blake Griffin is probably by a decent margin the better playmaker, especially as you saw his growth throughout his career post CP3, right? Once him and CP separated, you really got to see him play make more and more, and he was exceptional at it. Dare I say, if he didn't have CP alongside him his entire career, he probably would have been a guy who averaged 6+ assists because he was just that great as a passer. And for a four man, right? I'm not saying he's the same caliber as some of these other guys who are more guard, ball dominant players. But as a four man, in that point forward role that he really started to take on later in his career, he was exceptional at it. So from an offensive perspective, I think that's where the difference is mostly. And then you get to the defensive end of the floor. Statistically, I think Blake Griffin was the better player, but also when you just watch the games, Blake Griffin was the better defender. Now, Amare Stoudemire was the better rim protector. I think that's hard to refute when you just look at their averages, and it makes sense, right? He could jump out the gym. He was long. He's a little bit taller than Blake Griffin, and he played in an era where rim protection was more coveted, I guess is a good way to put it. But now, when you look over at Blake Griffin was more of a malleable defender. He was more of a versatile defender. He could, switch on to different positions and hold his own better than Amare Stoudemire could. And you see that reflected in their defensive stats, right? Like his defensive box plus minus is better. His defensive win shares are better because he was more of a versatile defender, right? He wasn't the shot blocker that Amare was. That's definitely fair to say. But outside of that, in the open court, getting steals, switching on to guys, being able to be a versatile defender, Blake Griffin had that. So you set all this up. You look at the stats. You look at their play styles. You watch the film. Who is the better player out of Amare Stoudemire and Blake Griffin. To me, it's razor close, and it's very hard to decide, right? It's super, super close because for all the reasons we just broke down, right? Their careers are dang near identical, right? Essentially, Amare just played a little bit longer, like a season longer, but their careers are so, so, so similar. For me, I think what makes me edge with Blake Griffin and why I think Blake Griffin is better is because the development that he had throughout his career. Amare, don't get me wrong, he developed. He was a great player. He was an offensive juggernaut, especially at his prime. But we knew what Amare was. Amare was a finisher, meaning you give him the ball, he's going to go score. He's a great isolation scorer. He's a great pick and roll guy because he can feast in the mid range, he can pick and pop, he can get all the way to the basket, catch lobs, stuff like that. But in terms of him being a offensive hub, right, him being a guy who can create offense for his teammates, he was not what Blake Griffin was, and Blake Griffin grew into that. And not only did he grow into that, he grew into being a very serviceable and at certain parts of his career, a really legitimate threat from the 3 point line. And that's something that Amare Stoudemire wasn't. You could debate who the better shooter was because how good of a shooter Amare was from the mid range, but in terms of who the better 3 point shooter was, especially later in their careers, I think you have to edge Blake Griffin. And that just speaks to the development that he had because he went from coming into the league to not being able to hit the wide side of a barn, if that's what the expression is, to being a guy who shot 36% from three, 38% from three, above league average from three pretty consistently, and he didn't do so on limited attempts, right? Like at his peak on Detroit 2 years in a row, he shot over 6 attempts from three, so he was getting up a decent amount of volume as well. So I say all this to say these are two amazing, high caliber, guys whose primes may have been short lived, but in their primes, at their peaks, two high level players who are very close in talent, close in abilities, etc. Right? It's very hard to differentiate who the better player is, but if I had to choose, because he's the slightly better defender, because he grew into his role as an offensive player and was able to be a hub on offense, be able to be the creator for an offense, I think I would go Blake Griffin. And he actually led a team to the playoffs as the best player 2 seasons in a row, I believe. I think the season that he got traded to Detroit, they made it. And then the following season, even though he was hurt, I think they made it as well. So for that reason, I'm edging Blake Griffin. But this is a very tough debate. This is one of the closest debates I think you could find in NBA history when you're talking about who the best player is. Because when you look at them side by side, everything is the same, right? We just talked about it. Statistically, they are dang near the exact same. When you look at the awards, the accolades, they are dang near the exact same. When you look at the injury history, the games played, the games not played, they are dang near the exact same. And then you got to really look into the film and really break down those things to see where those differences are. And I think if you break those things down, due to his development, right, due to the maturity that he showed in developing his game in different ways throughout the course of his career, I'm sure playing with a great shot creator and a great playmaker like Chris Paul definitely helped that. I gotta go with Blake Griffin ever so slightly, ever so slightly. But let me know what you guys think. This is a very fun debate to have because I think you can't find too many guys who are this close in similarity when you're talking about careers and the levels and peaks that they reach. So again, let me know what you guys think. This was a fun one to talk about. Peace.